first night alone is not always the hardest. Sometimes it's the 100th, the night when the boxes are finally unpacked, when nobody is coming back for the rest of their things, when the house is quiet enough that you can hear the refrigerator humming in the kitchen, when you realize there is no longer anyone you need to wait for. No footsteps, no keys turning in the door, no familiar voice asking, "How was your day?" Just you and the strange silence of a life that used to belong to two people. Maybe tonight you're lying in a room that still doesn't feel like yours. Maybe you're staring at a ceiling you've stared at 1,000 times. But somehow, everything looks different now, because divorce doesn't only change your relationship status, it changes your routines, your home, your weekends, your holidays, your finances, your friendships, your plans. Sometimes even the way you introduce yourself. And underneath all of that, there is one frightening question. What am I supposed to do with the rest of my life? If you've asked yourself that question, this is for you. Her name was Laura. She was 47 when her marriage ended. For 22 years, she had been someone's wife. She had been a mother, a daughter, a sister, an employee, a friend. But somewhere along the way, she had stopped being simply Laura. Her life had become a collection of responsibilities: school schedules, grocery lists, bills, family dinners, birthdays, anniversaries, mortgage payments, appointments, arguments, apologies, plans. Then one morning, the life she had spent 22 years building suddenly had a different shape. The divorce was finalized on a Tuesday. There was no dramatic music, no storm outside, no cinematic goodbye, just paperwork, a signature, a handshake, and a sentence from someone she barely knew. "You're officially divorced." Laura walked outside. The sun was shining. People were buying coffee. Cars were moving through traffic. Someone was laughing on the sidewalk. The world hadn't changed, but hers had. That evening, she went home. Her old home. Except it wasn't really her old home anymore. Half the closet was empty. One side of the bathroom cabinet had been cleared. There were fewer shoes by the door, fewer jackets hanging near the entrance. Even the refrigerator felt different. She opened it. There were leftovers from Sunday. A container of food her husband used to like. She stood there holding it, then quietly said, "You're not here anymore." She didn't know why she said it aloud. Maybe because saying it made it real. She threw the food away, closed the refrigerator, and stood in the kitchen. For the first time in 22 years, she had absolutely no idea what she was supposed to do next. She went to bed early, not because she was tired, because there was nowhere else to go. She turned off the television, checked her phone, scrolled through social media, closed it, opened it again. Then she noticed something. Almost everyone she knew seemed to be moving forward. Couples posting vacations, families celebrating birthdays, friends announcing anniversaries. Someone had just bought a house. Someone else was pregnant. Someone was celebrating 20 years of marriage. Laura stared at the screen, then put her phone face down. she whispered. Everyone knows how to live, except me. And that thought scared her, because she had always been good at knowing what came next. School, marriage, children, career, family, retirement. There had been a map. Now someone had taken the map away. The next morning, Laura woke up at 6:14. Her body still remembered the old routine. Make coffee, wake the kids, pack lunches, check the weather, rush. But the children were adults now, and her husband was gone. There was no reason to wake up early, so she stayed in bed for nearly an hour. Eventually, she got up, made 1 cup of coffee, and sat at the kitchen table. 1 cup. That tiny detail broke her heart. For years, she had automatically made 2. Now there was only 1. She looked at the empty chair across from her and cried, not because she wanted her marriage back. That was the confusing part. She didn't. The marriage had ended for reasons she understood. There had been years of unhappiness, conversations that went nowhere, distance, resentment, 2 people becoming strangers while still living in the same house. She knew why it ended. But knowing why something should end doesn't make the ending painless. Sometimes you can know you made the right decision and still grieve what it cost you. 3 weeks later, Laura found an old box in the garage. Inside were things from before her marriage. College photographs, old concert tickets, a notebook, a necklace, and a photograph of herself at 23. She barely recognized the woman. She was standing beside a lake. Her hair was shorter. She was laughing. No wedding ring, no children, no responsibilities, just Laura. She stared at the photograph, then whispered, "Who were you?" She almost put it away. Instead, she carried it inside. That photograph became the first thing she placed on the nightstand. Not because she wanted to return to her 20s, because she had finally remembered something important. She existed before the marriage, and she still existed after it. That realization didn't fix everything, but it changed the question. Before, Laura had been asking, how do I rebuild my marriage? Then, how do I survive the divorce? Now she began asking, who do I want to become? That question was terrifying. It was also strangely exciting, because for the first time in decades, she didn't have to build a life around someone else's preferences. She could choose the furniture, the meals, the weekend plans, the vacations, the music, the color of the bedroom, the restaurant, the bedtime, the morning, even the coffee. She realized how many decisions she had made automatically, not because she was forced, because marriage teaches you to think in we. Now she had to learn how to think in I, and that felt selfish at first, then liberating. One Saturday morning, Laura drove somewhere she hadn't been in years. A small bookstore. She used to love reading, but during her marriage, she had gradually stopped. There was always something else to do. Someone else who needed something. She walked through the aisles, picked up a novel, read the back, put it down, picked up another. Then she noticed a chair near the window. She sat. Sunlight came through the glass. Nobody needed her. Nobody was waiting. Nobody was asking what time she would be home. For 10 minutes, she simply sat there, and something inside her softened. She realized freedom doesn't always feel like excitement. Sometimes it feels like sitting alone in a bookstore on a Saturday morning and realizing nobody is controlling the direction of your life anymore. If you're starting over after divorce, you may be waiting for yourself to feel strong. You may think one day you'll wake up and suddenly feel confident, free, excited, ready. But starting over rarely happens like that. It happens in tiny decisions. The first dinner you eat alone without feeling sorry for yourself. The first bill you handle and realize you can manage it. The first weekend you make plans because you actually want to. The first time you buy something for yourself without asking whether someone else will like it. The first night you laugh again. The first morning you wake up and don't immediately think about what went wrong. These moments look insignificant. They aren't. They are the bricks of your new life. Laura eventually started walking every morning. At first it was only 10 minutes, then 20, then 40. She didn't walk to lose weight. She didn't walk because someone told her she should. She walked because she needed somewhere to put her thoughts. One morning, she noticed a tree she had passed hundreds of times. It was blooming. She had never noticed it before. She stopped, looked at it, and laughed quietly. How did I never see you? Not dramatically. Small things. A different lamp, new curtains, plants by the window, a painting she loved, a chair positioned exactly where she wanted it. The house slowly stopped looking like a place where someone had left. It became a place where Laura lived. That distinction mattered. She wasn't preserving an old life anymore. She was creating a new one. There were still bad days. Of course there were. One night, her ex-husband called about something involving the family. After the conversation ended, Laura sat on the edge of her bed. The old sadness returned. She wondered if she had made the right choice. She wondered whether she would ever love someone again. She wondered if she had wasted 22 years. Then she looked at the photograph on her nightstand. The 23-year-old woman smiled back at her. Laura smiled too. No, she whispered. I didn't waste them. 22 years had given her children, memories, lessons, mistakes, love, pain, growth. She didn't have to call the marriage a failure simply because it ended. A marriage can end and still contain meaningful years. A chapter can close without becoming a mistake. Maybe that's something you need to hear tonight. Your divorce does not erase your history. It doesn't make the years meaningless. It doesn't mean you failed at love. It means something ended. That's all. And endings can be painful without being proof that your life is ruined. You may be starting over at 35, 45, 55, 65, maybe even later. And perhaps you're terrified because you think everyone else started their new life years ago. But life doesn't have a deadline for beginning again. There is no age at which you're officially too late. If you're listening right now because you're rebuilding your life after divorce, subscribe to this channel before you leave. I mean that seriously. Don't let this be just another video you watched on one difficult night. Subscribe and make this channel part of your new chapter, because there will be nights when you're strong and nights when you're not. There will be mornings when you feel free and mornings when you miss the life you thought you would have forever. There will be moments when everyone tells you to move on, while your heart is still trying to understand what happened. Come back here. This channel is for those quiet moments, for rebuilding, for heartbreak, for starting again when nobody sees how difficult it is. Subscribe now. Let this be one small promise to yourself. I'm not finished. 1 year after the divorce, Laura took a solo trip. Nothing extravagant. 3 days. A small hotel near the ocean. She checked in alone. The receptionist asked, "How many?" Laura smiled. "Just me." The words felt strange. Then they felt good. She walked to her room, opened the curtains. The ocean was outside. She ordered dinner, sat by the window, and watched the sunset. No one asked what time they were leaving. No one wanted to change the restaurant. No one was unhappy with the room. No one was waiting for her decision. She could simply sit there and breathe. Halfway through dinner, she started crying. Not because she was sad, because she realized she had survived the thing she once believed would destroy her. That night, she wrote in her notebook, "I thought starting over meant losing everything. Then, it doesn't." She continued, "It means finding out what still belongs to me." She looked at the sentence, then wrote one more. "And apparently, a lot still does." Maybe you're discovering that now. Maybe you lost a marriage, but you still have your humor, your intelligence, your curiosity, your friendships, your children, your talents, your dreams, your ability to love, your ability to learn, your ability to choose, your ability to wake up tomorrow and do something differently. Divorce can take away a future you expected, but it cannot take every possible future. There are still futures you haven't imagined, people you haven't met, places you haven't seen, versions of yourself you haven't become. And that is where hope begins. Not in pretending the past didn't hurt, but in accepting that the past is no longer the only thing ahead of you. There will be nights when you miss being married. That's okay. You may miss the routine, the familiarity, the family traditions, the feeling of having someone beside you. Missing those things doesn't mean you made the wrong decision. You can miss a life without wanting that life back. You can grieve what was and still choose what comes next. Both can exist. Laura eventually started dating again. Not immediately. Not because someone told her she needed to. She waited until being alone no longer felt like an emergency. That distinction changed everything. She wasn't looking for someone to rescue her from loneliness. She was looking for someone who could join a life she had already learned to enjoy. And when she eventually met someone, she didn't introduce herself by her divorce. She didn't begin with, "I'm divorced." She began with, "I'm Laura." That was enough. Years later, she found the photograph from the lake again. She looked at the 23-year-old woman. Then she looked at herself in the mirror. The face was older. There were lines around her eyes. Her hair had changed. But she recognized the woman looking back, not because she was the same, because she had finally become her own person again. She placed the photograph back in the box, then closed the lid. She didn't need to live in the past version of herself. She simply needed to remember that woman existed, and that she had survived long enough to meet her again. So, if you're starting over after divorce, please don't demand that you rebuild your entire life tonight. You don't need a 5-year plan. You don't need to know whether you'll fall in love again. You don't need to know where you'll live 10 years from now. You don't need to prove anything to your ex. You don't need to look happier than you feel. You don't need to rush into another relationship. You don't need to convince anyone that you're doing fine. Tonight, you only need to take the next step. Maybe that's cleaning one room. Maybe it's making your favorite meal. Maybe it's calling a friend. Maybe it's taking a walk. Maybe it's finally buying something you've wanted for years. Maybe it's simply getting out of bed tomorrow morning and making 1 cup of coffee for yourself, because sometimes rebuilding a life begins with something that small. And if tonight you're sitting in a quiet house wondering, what now? Let me give you one answer. Now, you get to meet yourself again. Not the wife, not the husband, not the person who spent years trying to keep everyone happy, not the person who carried a marriage that was already becoming too heavy. Just you, the person underneath all those roles, the person with unfinished dreams, unwritten plans, forgotten interests, new possibilities. You are still here. That matters. So tonight, don't call yourself broken. You're rebuilding. Don't call yourself behind. You're beginning from experience. Don't call yourself alone. You're learning how to stand beside yourself. And don't call your life over. It isn't. Maybe the life you planned ended, but that is not the same thing as your life ending. There is a difference. A very important one.
If you haven't subscribed yet, do it now, seriously. If you're going through a divorce, rebuilding after one, or simply trying to find yourself after years of putting everyone else first, subscribe to this channel. I want these stories to become something you return to. Not just tonight, not just when you're heartbroken, but whenever you need a reminder that starting again is possible. Subscribe before you leave. And if you're already subscribed, thank you for being here. You're part of a community of people who are quietly rebuilding lives that once looked completely different. You don't have to rebuild everything at once. We'll take it one night at a time, one story at a time, one small step at a time. Laura's life didn't become perfect. She still had difficult days. She still remembered the marriage. She still had moments when the past surprised her.
But she stopped measuring her life by what had been lost. She started measuring it by what she could still create. One morning, she stood in her kitchen, made coffee. 1 cup. She looked across the table. The chair was empty. But this time,
The emptiness didn't hurt. It was simply empty. She opened the window. Morning air came inside. Birds were singing somewhere outside. The sunlight moved across the floor. Laura took a sip of coffee and smiled. She wasn't waiting for someone to come home. She was already home. Maybe that's where your story is going too. Not back to who you were. Not back to the marriage. Not back to the life that ended. Forward. Slowly. Imperfectly. But forward. You may not know who you'll become. That's okay. You don't need to. The most beautiful parts of your next chapter may be things you can't imagine yet. So let yourself be curious. Let yourself be afraid. Let yourself grieve. Let yourself laugh again.
Let yourself make mistakes. Let yourself become someone new. You are not starting from zero. You are starting from everything you've learned. And there is a difference. Tonight, when you turn off the light, don't think about rebuilding your entire future. Just think about tomorrow morning. Imagine waking up, opening the curtains, making your coffee, taking a breath, and saying quietly, "I'm still here." That's enough. For tonight, that's more than enough. Because maybe starting over isn't about creating a completely different life. Maybe it's about finally creating a life that feels like yours. And one day, you'll look around that life. You'll see the little things you chose, the places you went, the people you met, the things you learned, the person you became. And you'll realize something. The divorce wasn't the end of your story. It was the moment the story changed. The life you thought you were going to have ended. But you didn't.
You are still here. Still breathing. Still becoming. Still capable of love. Still capable of happiness. Still capable of beginning again. So tonight, put down the guilt. Put down the fear. Put down the question of whether you're too old. Put down the pressure to have everything figured out. You don't. You only need tomorrow. And tomorrow is still yours. Good night.